Hey there, welcome back. Today I'll be doing a more informational kind of video. Most of it's not going to have face cam. I'm just doing the intro with my face so y'all can see my face. But it's a video on a dark and horrifying topic that a lot of people simply aren't really aware of. And it's something that I really want to bring attention to. And it's something I've been interested in for years, to be honest. Today we're going to be talking about the forgotten Holocaust. What is it? Where did it happen? When and why did it happen? And basically everything that has to do with this forgotten Holocaust that I'm talking about. Come with me as I explore one of the darkest events in all of human history. I opened this video expecting the vast majority of people to already know what the Holocaust is or was, but if you don't, here is a short synopsis. The Holocaust was a genocide carried out by Nazi Germany before and during the events of World War II, in which the Nazis systematically murdered 6 million Jews in an effort to exterminate the Jewish race, and which was deemed by the Nazis as the quote-unquote final solution. It is undoubtedly the most famous and notorious example of a blatant genocide being carried out by a state or government. As for the definition of a genocide, it is deemed as the deliberate and systematic killing of a group of people, usually a specific group of people. Purposeful extermination, pretty much. Now, with that being said, what may I be referring to when I'm talking about the forgotten Holocaust? How could we just go over such an event that may have killed millions of people and it may have been systematic and we just don't know about it? What could I possibly be referring to? This story begins in 1865 when King Leopold II of Belgium ascended to the throne. He had long pushed for the establishment of an overseas colony for Belgium even before he became king, eyeing many different parts of Africa before eventually settling on Central Africa. He longed for establishing overseas colonies for Belgium because he seen the other empires of Europe doing it, and he wanted it for Belgian power. During the scramble for Africa of the late 1800s, in which Europeans mass colonized and subjugated most of the continent, Leopold II in 1878 had hired Henry Morton Stanley, a well-renowned explorer, to explore the Congo River system and establish stations and outposts and secure treaties with local rulers on Leopold's behalf. Between 1879 and 1882, Leopold had consolidated his Congo operations under the International Association of the Congo, and during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, in which Europeans split up Africa, the European powers acknowledged Leopold as the sole owner of the 1.46 million square mile or 2.35 million square kilometer colony under a personal union rather than as an official territory of Belgium. This meant that Leopold possessed full control over the colony instead of the Belgian government having control of it. That's when it was then deemed as the quote-unquote Congo Free State. Unfortunately, it was anything but free. This is how King Leopold II was able to get a hold of the Congo. The Congo had plenty of resources that could be exploited for, more specifically the rubber resources. The Congo during this time period was one of the largest bearers of rubber on the planet, along with places in Southeast Asia. Rubber was very sought after during this time period, especially during the Industrial Revolution, where it became a lot more prominent, and increased use of tires, especially with automobiles, amongst other things. And Leopold needed a way to effectively exploit the colony for its resources. And the way in which he went about exploiting the colony is what I am personally deeming as the forgotten Holocaust. At the start of his reign over the Congo, Leopold used African mercenaries to uphold control. And in 1888, he had organized them into a formal colonial army called the Force Publique. By the late 1890s, it was the most powerful army in Central Africa, boasting more than 19,000 soldiers, consisting of over half of Belgium's total military force. By 1900, the force had established 183 military posts in the region, and by 1908, it grew to 313. Due to the Free State's revenue coming from rubber exports, the force established a quote-unquote labor regime and a quote-unquote slave society over which private companies would come in and purchase extraction rights for rubber in the area. And the force publique would act as the corporate labor police and oversee laborers in areas controlled directly by Leopold himself. This is primarily where the atrocities that occurred in the Congo during this time period happened. Historians describe regions controlled by concession companies as hell on earth within the Congo. The force publique during King Leopold's rule over the Congo was used as a secret police of sorts to enforce rule upon the territory and maximize rubber extraction. Millions of native peoples in the region were forced into cramped and unsanitary labor camps, leading to millions dying of widespread diseases of many types. In these labor camps, many brutal tactics were used to keep workers in check, mutilation and extreme brutality being the most popular of the choices. When a village refused to submit to the rubber regime, state or company troops would often shoot everyone in sight, just so neighboring villages could get the message: submit or die. A whip called a chicote, made of raw, sun-dried hippo skin, would often be used as a form of punishment. Blows from this whip would leave permanent scars, 25 or more blows leading to unconsciousness, and hundreds of blows leading to death. Public beatings to prove a point were quite common, with victims being held down, stripped, whipped, and forced to salute afterwards. In one account from a British newspaper of the Congo Reform Movement, a soldier recalled what they were told to do with a rebellious village. Quote, "The officer in command ordered us to cut off the heads of men and hang them on the village palisades, and to hang the women and the children on palisades in the form of a cross." Several survivors of these atrocities admitted that they lived through these acts of terror by playing dead during massacres and waiting till soldiers left to seek help. Even if they had severed limbs or hands, they would do this. It was also not uncommon for soldiers to force young men to rape or kill their own mothers or sisters. The most notorious atrocity committed in the Congo during this time period was the severed hands, which pictures of which have become infamous, although many do not know the context behind these heartbreaking photos. Local chiefs aligned with the force publique would often cut off the hands of other slain villages as proof to the Belgians of their accomplishments. Cut off hands were used as currency in the Congo as proof of killing laborers or as a way to save bullets and inflict damage or prove a point. Though King Leopold himself apparently denounced dismembering of the hands because it quote-unquote hurt his business. He didn't care about the well-being of these people. He didn't want their hands to be cut off because it was hurting his business. What a sick guy. There were also prisons and hostage-taking that took place during Leopold's occupation of the Congo, although it wasn't an official policy declared by the king himself, forcing workers to collect rubber whilst taking their family as hostages and placing them into prisons. These prisons were in poor condition, reporting anywhere from 3 to 10 deaths on a daily basis, and persons of color resisting would be sent to forced labor camps with even worse conditions, those same labor camps that I talked about earlier. Famine was also common in these conditions as workers were poorly fed or not even fed at all. Some of the sickest practices done in the Congo at the time was sanctioned by Leopold himself, such as child colonies. Orphaned Congolese children would be kidnapped and forced into schools operated by Catholic missionaries from Belgium, in which they'd learn to work or become soldiers. These schools were being funded for by the state. More than 50% of the children sent to these child colonies died of disease, and thousands more died from the forced marches that they had to go on into these schools, reminiscent of death marches. Death marches were very infamous within the Armenian genocide, for example. In one instance, 108 boys were sent to a child colony, in order to be converted there or choose some sort of career path. Out of these 108 boys, Only 62 survived by the time they had gotten to the child colony. 8 of those 62 boys dying less than a week later. So at the end of it all, there was only 54 boys out of 108 left after they had forced to march to a child colony. Take it for what you will. Lastly, of the atrocities that were committed inside the Congo Free State during this time period, cannibalism was quite common amongst force publique soldiers, although it was condemned by the state and King Leopold II. They did ultimately turn a blind eye to it. Cut off limbs and dead people would often be consumed as food when unable to meet the rubber quota set by the state. This was more often done by the chiefs in the region that they, align with in order to subjugate the region, in order to subjugate the people. A lot of chiefs in the region, the native Africans, would eat their own people. Now, the force publique, there were also Europeans who took place in the eating of the chopped off limbs or dead people. This is probably the darkest fact of the atrocities that was going on. They're literally consuming people who didn't fall in line with what they wanted to do. Either consuming them or shooting them then consuming them. Yeah. Now we get to the muddy waters of it all. The death toll. And was it even a genocide? The death toll of these atrocities committed in the Congo Free State over the span of 2 decades is widely debated, although it is generally agreed upon by historians that the Congo had a significant population decline during this period. Where historians disagree is whether Leopold II and his rule was the primary reason for this decline. Ultimately, diseases were the primary cause of the population decline during this period, representing about 90% of the population decline during this period. Diseases such as sleeping sickness, smallpox, and syphilis, amongst other diseases, were the main causes, as compared to the smaller number of people who died due to murder or violence committed directly against the Congolese people. The Belgians did bring new diseases to these areas that the Congolese people were never exposed to, and packing a bunch of people into labor camps and prisons that were unsanitary allowed for the easy spread of disease, which, in my humble opinion, makes these deaths a direct consequence of the reign of terror over the territory of the Congo. Estimates of the death toll range widely. Some historians say 20 million souls died, while others cite around 75% of the population of the Congo died during this period, during King Leopold's reign. And an outlier estimate of 1.2 million deaths was cited in a 2020 study done recently. Because of the lack of official census data during this time, it's hard to say. But based on everything that I have gathered, the likely range of deaths in the Congo during King Leopold's reign around this time is anywhere from 5 to 15 million people, with 8 to 12 million range being the most likely ballpark of the deaths during this period, basing off of numerous studies and historical accounts. Regardless, the number of people who lost their lives during King Leopold's reign in the Congo was in the millions. Millions with an M. Millions. During the time in which Leopold was ruling over the Congo, the international community had begun to scrutinize and criticize his oppressive and authoritarian regime. Countries like the UK and United States had lobbied to revoke Leopold's ownership over the Congo, describing the conditions there as quote-unquote crimes against humanity. Only after the criticisms from the international community had Leopold attempted to help with the sickness and diseases running rampant in his colony. Although these efforts were ultimately irrelevant and futile and didn't really change the conditions in the area that much. Because of international pressure, Belgium officially annexed the Congo from Leopold's rule in 1908, taking control of the territory where the conditions improved drastically under direct Belgian control instead of under Leopold's control. Because the Congo Free State never openly expressed or had a policy of extermination, the atrocities committed in the colony during this time period is never really generally considered a genocide in the legal or technical sense. as the deaths happened more because of Leopold's greed and want to exploit the colony for its resources, and when conditions had gotten out of hand, he chose not to do anything and batted a blind eye. I argue that with all the atrocities committed by the force publique that I have described today, you cannot convince me that executions of entire villages for not submitting, child colonies, forced labor camps, death marches, cannibalism, and the severing of limbs is not enough means to not consider this a genocide, especially because of the sheer number of people who died. Upwards of 5 million deaths, for me personally, is more than enough to be considered a genocide. No matter what legal or technical definition you want to go by, if those deaths are attributed to you over that time period, that is a genocide. I don't care. What are we doing here? King Leopold II's name should live in infamy the same way that other dictators' names live in infamy, such as Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and amongst many others, because his actions, whether direct or indirect, led to the extermination of millions of people in just 2 decades of time. Yet it's never talked about or discussed. I almost guarantee you that 90% of people watching this video doesn't know who King Leopold is, which is a crime. Not personally your fault, but it's a crime the fact that we haven't been taught this, because this is recent history. The 1800s and early 1900s was not that long ago. This is why I call this the Holocaust before the Holocaust. It happened before the Holocaust and had around the same amount of deaths, if not more deaths. But we're not taught about it. Why is it not talked about more? I believe there's multiple reasons as to why this tragedy isn't discussed more in history. The primary ones being where it happened and the group of people it happened to, or the race of people it happened to. When it comes to black history in general, because of how they've been viewed and treated over history, we don't learn about many events or atrocities or tragedies that happened to black people. A perfect example of this is the 1921 Oklahoma race massacre of Black Wall Street, one of the most affluent communities in America. Not just one of the most affluent black communities, one of the most affluent communities. It was destroyed purely because of race. They were black. They couldn't be having that. With over 300 people being killed and 800 more being injured. But most people probably don't even know about it or even know what Black Wall Street was. The Congolese genocide is another great example of this exact scenario that I'm talking about, with it occurring in Africa to black people or Africans. We are inherently not taught about it because of this reason. And it's because it didn't involve it's also because it didn't involve any international war or conflict of some sorts, and it was a more isolated event that happened to a specific group of people. Many governments across the world don't feel a need to educate people on this atrocity that occurred in the Congo in the late 1800s and early 1900s because of this. It had nothing to do with them. The fact that this event has not been officially been deemed a genocide as well, and it doesn't have a specific name tied to it or a name of an event tied to it, also led to it not being talked about as much, which is honestly a travesty. This should be discussed way more, but that's why I'm making this video today, to educate others on a terrible event that most people probably don't even know about. I feel like if what's happening in Palestine could be deemed as a genocide, this could be deemed as a genocide as well. So in closing, this was a video essay on the forgotten Holocaust, the Congolese genocide. I do hope I did my due diligence in educating others on this tragic and dark period of time in world history. And I hope you walked away from this video learning something that you really never knew about before. Ultimately, that's all for today's video. I know it's more of a heavier topic than I usually discuss, but that's the point of my channel, expressing the freedom to really create whatever I feel like the world should know about. Things that I feel like I can genuinely educate others on, and things that I feel like people are interested in. If you made it to the end of the video, I'm glad you tuned in to watch me discuss this topic, even though it's a much longer video than what I usually make. It is greatly appreciated. If you made it to the end, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video, whatever the topic may be. You never know with this channel. I can make a topic on anything. Ultimately, like, comment, subscribe, share. Caleb out.